All right, history students, it's Tuesday and we are starting our week, acknowledging we have 4 more weeks of school left. In these weeks, we are going to be learning a lot of the history of Rome. And if you look at the homework that you have between now and Thursday, you'll see that there are going to be some note cards, and the note cards are related to Julius Caesar and the second Triumvirate. So it's more Roman history. Reading lessons 96 to 97 and doing these note cards. There's also 2 other things that I want you to do, and I'll show you this on the next slide. One of the things I want you to do is review for your African landforms map quiz. You'll be able to do this review by clicking on a link that I will post on Google Classroom and on RenWeb. The link will take you to an online review quiz or a review thing that you can use. And you can do it as many times as you'd like, but do it at least once between now and Thursday to continue to practice African landforms. Okay, next thing is we're introducing our final history project of the year. Now, this is a project that is going to come due in 3 weeks. Tuesday, 3 weeks. Not the last day of classes, but the last week of classes. The final history project of the year, you can do this by yourself. That's perfectly fine. Or you can work in a group of 2 or 3 people. Now, as a special concession to our situation right now, you are allowed to work with a history student in another one of my classes, and you even can work with a sibling if you would like to, or of course, you and your siblings can work in different groups if you would like. If you want to be in a group, each person in the group has to do some of the work individually, but of course you can brainstorm and organize it together and then have perhaps one of you put it together, or you can use shared Google Docs or shared Google slideshow or shared Google platforms where you can all edit it together. Now, how could you work in a group? There's lots of ways. You can call other people on the phone. You could FaceTime. You can start your own Google Meet. If one of you chooses a password and the others join, you can be on video calling with each other inside of Google Meet. You can email. You have enough time to even send each other old-fashioned letters if that is how you would like to communicate. You have 2 choices for this history project. You are either going to create a newspaper or you're going to create a history newscast. Either way, you are going to choose from a list that has a bunch of people that we've talked about this year, and you're going to choose 3 people from the history list for this year. For the newspaper, if you decide to go this way, you're going to you need to have at least 8 items in the paper. 3 of those will be articles about events that you want to highlight about the people. So, of course, you choose the people first. But then 3 of your articles will be about those people or events about their life. 1 or even 2, if you like, need to be obituaries. I would say probably you do 1 obituary, and an obituary of the person's death. I will show you in the project sheet a little bit more about that. One of the things in your paper needs to be a picture, and the others can be something fun like comic strips, puzzles, sports reports, or advertisements, all historically related, of course. That's for the newspaper. If you want to do a newscast, this is a video project, but you still need to have 3 written paragraphs, 1 for each of the 3 people that you are going to be talking about. You're going to put together a 3 to 5 minute newscast with video clips about important events in these people's life, and you're going to have a mock interview of either a witness to one of these events or a person involved. And I am, of course, posting the project sheet with much more specific information on Google Classroom and on RenWeb. I just wanted to remind you, if you do choose to do the newscast and you are working with video clips, it is easy enough to do a video clip to record on a phone and to text it to another person. I have found that it's easier to text videos than it is to email them. But just a word of encouragement for making this easier for yourself, I would definitely keep those video clips under a minute. That way you don't have an enormous file that you're trying to somehow email or upload and that sort of thing. Unless you really know what you're doing, in which case feel free to make a whole 5-minute clip. That's fine. So it doesn't have to be super sophisticated. I think, I can't promise this, but I think that you could probably do a couple of clips and maybe even upload them to something like Google Slides. Certainly, if you have a YouTube page, a private YouTube page like I do, where I only put these history videos, you could upload those short clips to YouTube and then you could link them in to a Google slideshow, and that might be a really easy way to combine video clips without having to know how to splice them together, just because most people don't really know that stuff. But some of you guys might know how to use iMovie or use some other program like that and put together. If so, do it. That sounds like fun too. All right, more information about that will be posted on Google Classroom and on RenWeb. All right, if you can get out your note cards that you already turned in a picture of for me, but I want you to correct these and check them. These, like all the other note cards, these need to be held together and kept for the final test of the year. All right, first note card said, what were the two main classes of people in the Roman Republic? The two main classes were the patricians and the plebeians. Patricians were the upper class. The plebeians were the lower class. The patricians, the upper class, have their start back when the first members were picked of the Senate, and those people just became the upper class. And then, of course, their families, their children, and everyone who came after them was upper class. So the Romans developed their social structure. They built it out of their political structure. These are a couple of pictures of patricians and plebeians, and it's the picture of the woman, the lower class person is in the background there. Down there with the picture of the men on the bottom right, you can see the much more fancy dressed men, and then you see on the right hand side, those would be the common men, and the common men are the plebeians. So where did the slaves in Italy come from? Men, women, and children were carried back as prisoners of war. So that means that at first there weren't a lot of slaves, but the more that Rome and, well, the Italians in general conquered other places, the more slaves there were. These slaves were different than the system of slavery that we had in the United States of America, because in our country, when a person who had been enslaved was set free, that person was always still able to be noticed, because slavery was very specific to skin color. But in Rome, the Italian slaves were not like that. So if a slave obtained freedom, either because the slave's master set him or her free, or they saved up money and they bought their freedom, if for any reason a slave obtained freedom, they were able actually to sort of melt back into the culture and change their social class a lot quicker because they weren't marked by anything external that indicated that they were slaves. They were just slaves because they had been perhaps even an upper class in a different culture, but then they were captured as prisoners of war and brought back. This right here, this mosaic, shows some of the slaves at work. And I just wanted to point out the mosaic. We might come back to this later, but this was a common way that the Romans decorated. It is rocks, different colored rocks, put together to form a picture. Really a very cool picture. All right, I'm going to read to you a little bit from a book that I've read several times through called Quintus. And this book is a story about persecution of Christians at the time of the Emperor Nero. In this book, Quintus, the main character, is not a Christian. He has been sent by his parents or by his father to learn a trade, a tent making trade. And he's going to be an apprentice at the house of a tent maker. This is during Nero's time, but right before the persecution kicked off or got bad. So he was going to learn the tent making trade, and he was going to the house of somebody who was known as a Jew, but actually the family was Christian. They were Jewish Christians. So let me pick up, and I'm going to read to you. Quintus has just come into the place where he's going to learn how to do tent making. Okay. Without interest, Quintus nodded. He still was not enthusiastic about the tent making trade. Making a frame is really the most difficult part of the whole job, especially when you have to make a big one, Demas continued. Demas was another apprentice, but somebody who had been there longer. The frame should be strong and stable, as well as light and simple to take apart. The boys had walked over to where the rolls of leather were stored. With an expert eye, Demas selected the material. He lifted the heavy rolls as if they weighed nothing. With open admiration, Quintus looked on. "Are you a slave or a freeman?" he asked suddenly. "A freeman. But why do you ask that?" Demas replied in surprise. "Well, of course, it's nice for you to be a freeman, but on the other hand, it's a pity. If you were a slave, we might have a chance of seeing you wrestle in the arena one day. What a beautiful, strong body you have." Demas did not answer. His face set, and he tightened his lips. It appeared to Quintus that Demas now lifted the rolls of leather with more vigor than was really necessary. "We'll take this piece," Demas said abruptly. "Come with me. I'll teach you how to cut the strips." The leather was spread out on the floor, and with a piece of charcoal, Demas drew the lines of where it had to be cut. He told Quintus how to keep the leather tight, and, taking a knife, he cut the leather in a perfectly straight line. Quintus, however, was more interested in looking at the hand that handled the knife. With pleasure he looked at the swelling arm muscles. "I myself am no softy," he thought, "but this fellow definitely beats me." Without realizing it, Quintus was sinning against the Lord. The Romans had adopted the Grecian ideas of glorification of the body. The Greeks saw it from the point of art. But in general, the Romans were not artistic at all, and they glorified the human body only at their sinful feast and at the games in the arena. Both nations, however, forgot to honor the Creator of men. That is why Paul warned the Corinthians to consider their bodies to be temples of God. Looking at Demas's arm, Quintus' thoughts wandered to the amphitheater. What if such an arm held a trident? It would certainly poke right through the shield. "Tell me, did you go to the games yesterday?" he asked Demas. Annoyed, the boy shook his head. "Oh, then you really missed something." Demas looked up. Did I miss something because I didn't look at that slaughter? You've got to be joking. That spectacle is one of the greatest sins of the Roman nation, he snapped. Quintus gasped with surprise. Completely puzzled, he stared at his workmate who continued cutting. Do you think the games are massacres? He asked incredulously. It was the first time he had heard someone say that. He thought Demas might be out of his mind. What else could they be? Demas asked and stopped cutting. Well, it's an entirely honest fight, Quintus argued. Both have equal chances, haven't they? Only the strongest, bravest, and deftest man wins. Now, here they're talking about the gladiator contest in the arena. Demas muttered something. Won't you ever open your eyes? He suddenly burst out. Do you still call that an honest fight? It's simply murder and nothing else. And thousands of people come to look at that slaughter just to enjoy themselves. What is wrong with you? Quintus responded. Demas looked at Quintus with compassion. Oh, yes, you poor blind people. You don't know any better. But I'll ask you a few questions. Perhaps then your eyes will be opened. Just imagine that Aquila came to me and said, Demas, this afternoon at 3:00, you will have to kill Quintus. Here's a sword. Would that be murder? Of course, Quintus answered readily. Fine, Demas said. But now Aquila also comes to you and says, hey, at 3:00, you have to kill Demas. Here's a trident. Would that be murder? Yes, I think so, Quintus answered, not understanding what Demas was driving at. Correct. And now Aquila goes to all his friends and acquaintances and invites them to watch this fight between us two. Can't you see that then we would have the same situation as in the arena? There, too, the gladiators are charged to kill each other. And if you also bear in mind that God has commanded, you shall not kill, then you might understand that the Christians abhor the so-called games and we never attend. The Christians? Quintus repeated. You don't happen to be a Christian then? Yes, I am, and I'm not the only one here. Nearly everybody in this house is a Christian. Well, well. And that's why you never go to the amphitheater. You must be bored when you have a day off. Not at all. Quite the opposite. We can't imagine that other people go to the theater just for their enjoyment. And what is shown there is entirely against the command of the Lord Jesus Christ. Thou shalt love the Lord your God above all and your neighbor as yourself. That's completely different from enjoying yourself by watching the suffering and death of your fellow men, isn't it? Quintus was just about to ask another question when a robust woman entered the atrium. She gave each laborer a mug of wine. That's Priscilla, Aquila's wife, Demas informed, while carrying on with cutting the leather. The woman approached the boys. Peace be with you, was her friendly greeting. Quintus looked at her and at the same moment knew he liked her. All right, I am going to stop there. The book is, it gets into catacombs, it gets into Christians who were martyrs, and this is a little bit later than the time period we're talking about, but still during the Roman Empire, still during this time. But of course, what we're studying is about 30 to 40 years before Christ, and this is something that happened within that generation after Jesus died. All right, that's Quintus. Now, I read this because you notice that he brought up the issue about a slave. Quintus wasn't a slave. He was apprenticed to be a trade. But what was the life of a slave like? Slaves were commonly beaten. They were treated as animals or property. and they were used as gladiators. So, um, I wanted to tell you about a story that I recently listened to. Um, G.A. Henty, I'm not sure if any of you have ever read any of his books, but he writes a lot of historical books. And my mother has the entire collection. She just loves G.A. Henty. But they are written, you see over here the green book, they are old publishing. Um, they cover a huge variety of um, different historical subjects. But recently, my mother gave me this particular um, Barrack the Briton, not the book, but the audio theater. So kind of think radio theater. I don't know if any of you have ever listened to Focus on the Family's radio theaters. They're wonderful. I love them. They make a long car ride go by like a flash. Way better, in my opinion, than watching a movie. They are just incredibly creative. They have sound effects, different voices, different actors. Anyway, this one is not done by Focus on the Family. This is done by a different audio theater in London, but several of G.A. Henty's books have been put. Now, this particular book, Beric the Briton, is story of the Roman invasion of Britain and of a group of these Britons who were brought back to Rome and what happened to them there. The book is amazing. It's fast paced. The audio theater is fast paced, and I wanted to give you a little taste of it in hopes that some of you might actually see get a chance sometime to. Oh, I have to click to get a chance sometime to listen to this yourself. Maybe request it for, um, maybe request it, from your parents or something. But the book right here is, um, it's a little bit old fashioned in its language, but it's still a really good story. You have here, for instance, that the Britons, of which Barrack is one of them, were brought and they were given to this guy Scopas, who is going to train them to be gladiators, because that's what happened to a lot of the strong and the good, the really the most amazing ones of them. They were sent to be gladiators. Anyway, trying to get this page to load. But right here, this is what he said. Nero has sent you 5 fresh scholars, Scopas, the person who was dropping them off. By Hercules, Scopas said, they are splendid barbarians. Whence come they? Oh, they are Britons. Ah, yes, Claudius brought back a few with him, but that was before I was here. I would they were all a few years younger. They are in their prime now. To make a man first class, one should begin with him young. This youngster here is just the age. I warrant me there will not be many who can hold their own against him when I have trained him. So the gladiators would get trained for years before they were sent to the arena. He is their chief, the centurion says, and speaks our language as well as you do. That is good. I speak a little Gaulish, but there is always trouble with newcomers from out of the way countries when we have no one who speaks their language. Well, I will leave you with them. They are in your charge. I have the other 15 to divide among the 3 other schools. I will take care of them, Scopas said. There is good feeding and good drinking here, and no one runs away. There's nowhere to run to. That's one thing. Still, what could a man want more than to be well housed, well fed, and have the companionship of plenty of good fellows? Don't you think so? He turned to Barrack, the chief. It's no use asking for more if one is not likely to get it. Certainly we might do worse. Well, follow me, Scopas said. I will introduce you to your comrades. Barrack and his companions took a hearty farewell of the others. Beric telling them that doubtless they would have frequent occasions of meeting. He then followed Scopas into a large hall. Here some 40 or 50 men were assembled. Some were swinging weights round their heads. Others were engaged at gymnastics exercises. 2 men, under the director of an instructor, were fighting with blunted swords. One great fellow, armed with the sword and shield, was hotly pursuing an active man of little over half his weight, carrying a trident in one hand and a net in the other, amid the laughter of the group watching them. All right, so this is when they first get dropped in this gladiator school. Now, here is the trailer for this particular radio theater, and you'll get a little bit of the flavor of what Beric the Briton, which is, by the way, a wonderful story of revenge, forgiveness, and of these Britons finding faith in Jesus and it changing their lives and their history.
The force of the charge instantly sent a shock through the Roman ranks.
Men, the Romans will be fast upon us! Quick! Follow me!
Imperial Rome on one side, and you see pagan Britain on the other side. And what the story's about? It's the clash of those two civilizations together.
I see the smoke of burning cities. The fury of Queen Boudicca will be unquenchable.
Beric the Briton, to me, when I read the script the very first time, I thought, this is a perfect mix of Braveheart and Gladiator. And they, boom.
It's an incredible journey. I mean, going from the shores of occupied Britain to being captured by the Roman occupiers, taken back to Rome as a trophy, and then put into the Colosseum. I mean, it's Gladiator, but with so much more.
Strike for your queen!
A thunderous shout arose, and like a mighty flood, the army surged forward.
The wolf hunt has been a great success.
Yes, it can be used as an education tool. Yes, it has message and it has meaning, but I think anyone would find their place in these stories.
The Roman lines suddenly split. Heavily armed cavalry now charged through the gap.
Into these two civilizations, Imperial Rome and pagan Britain, Christianity came and did its best work.
That there is only one God, an all-powerful creator who made the heaven, the earth, the sea.
A tale of lives being changed through an encounter with God.
It's like when we're facing persecution, where are we going to stand? How are we going to stand?
What it does is it kind of opens up the mind to see how astonishing really the impact of the early church, the impact of those early leaders, and the impact of really the Holy Spirit at work.
Today we will offer them an opportunity to meet their God.
And I think we live in an age where we really do not understand our history as such.
If you want it, come and take it.
His imagination is so powerful and so brilliantly moral.
Citizens of Rome!
Henty really has an insight into history and a sense of what it must have felt like at the time.
As Beric spoke, I have looked around this room and sought to gaze upon the mighty heroes who have defeated the Romans.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun because it's a good story.
He has succeeded where all of you have failed.
For the war!
It's exciting. It makes history exciting.
Death to the Romans!
We're all on a journey, and I think we're all Berics in that sense, that we're looking for something. Beric found what he was looking for, and I think the listeners of this story will find what they're looking for in Beric.
For there are always more stories to be told and more adventures to be had.
All right, back to our slideshow. So when you were reading the lesson this time, you were reading about Spartacus. I just wanted to show you this slide to tell you that there is a movie. It's from 1960. It is a really famous movie called Spartacus, about Spartacus, as you see up here. Winner of 4 Academy Awards. This is Kirk Douglas's best movie. Many people say, and Kirk Douglas himself was just passed away at a very old age. I am putting the link right here just to remind you, or to remind your parents if they want to check it out and see if this is appropriate for you, that a good resource for checking out things like that is commonsensemedia.org. They give you very thorough reviews of the of movies. This one, and then I often look at pluggedin.com. So Plugged In and Common Sense Media are great ways to kind of preview something and have a Christian perspective. Well, really, it's just also a parent perspective, because they sort of tell you anything that might be questionable in the movie, and then you can check it out if you want to. But nevertheless, you read about Spartacus, and I want you to see this and know that there is a very famous old, wow, 1960, that was a long time ago, 60 years old, movie about this event. All right, speaking of, a slave and a gladiator who escaped and formed a huge army of freed slaves who fought the Romans in the Servile War. This was Spartacus, as we said, and what an interesting and amazing story Spartacus had. All right, so inside of this story, we were talking about how first there was the Roman monarchy, and then the Roman Republic, and then what came next? What came after the Roman monarchy? That was the founding of Rome, the Roman Republic. That's what we've mostly been talking about this year. And then after that will come the Roman Empire. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but these lessons are edging closer and closer to Roman Empire. Here's a reminder of that. Monarchy, 753 BC, going through 509 BC, and then the Republic, 509 to 27 BC. So almost 500 years. And then the Empire from 27 BC to 476 AD, another 500 years of the Roman Empire. This slide just reminds us that the monarchy is when Rome had a king. The Republic is when Rome had, well, it says democracy, but it's more of a republic, which it was a representative government. And the empire is when there was an emperor. All right, past Spartacus to the next chapter. Marcus Crassus, Pompey the Great, and Julius Caesar made up the first Triumvirate. And you see in this word a prefix that you know. I know you know it from triangle and from tricycle, and those all have in common what number? They all have 3, just like this is 1, 2, 3 people. The first triumvirate, you have Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Crassus and Pompey, what were they famous for? I'm kind of looping them in here so that we can make sure you know a little bit of something about both of them. Crassus was famous for being a consul. Well, they were both consuls, but a censor of the Senate. Now, that word censor is a word that your book pointed out is still with us. And we use that when we talk about somebody not allowing something, removing books from the public view, or removing anything that's objectionable. Pompey was a consul. He had fought pirates. He was himself a really interesting person. But all of these people paled in comparison to Julius Caesar. Here's a picture of, I thought this was a really cool picture, of Pompey fighting the pirates with, you recognize the soldier formation here. And then over up here above, you see another formation of Roman soldiers. Here are the boats where they've been fighting the pirates. How did Caesar manage to get the people of Rome to like him? Well, people really like to be entertained. They really like their fun and their games. And that's how he got them to like him, by spending a lot of money on that stuff. What kind of military general was he? What wording? He was a cruel genius, practically undefeated, as he conquered Gaul, Germany, and Britain. All right, much of the strength. This is a page from the book. If you have the old book, which had some activity pages in it, I know not all of you do, so I just snapped a shot of it to put it in the slideshow. Much of the strength of Rome came from its well-organized army. So I wanted you to see how the army was organized in Rome. Up here on the top, 8 men made up one contubernium. These men ate together, they shared a tent. So you see 8 little faces in one tent. Then 10 of these contuberniums made up one century. 1 century. Isn't that interesting? Just like 10 decades make up a century for us. So that was 80 men. These men were led by a centurion, which now makes sense, doesn't it? A centurion had a century under him. 1 man carried a standard to identify his century. Another man, called the Tesserarius, gave out a new password every single day to keep out spies. Doesn't that sound like a fun way to do things? All right, so you have a century that had 80 men in it. 6 centuries made up a cohort. So a cohort was 480 men. These men were led by the Tribunus Militum. So right here. And then 10 cohorts. Each cohort has 480. 10 cohorts make up a legion, which was about 5,000 men. These men were led by the legatus. And that word legatus comes into our language as lieutenant. And Aquilifer carried an eagle as a sign of power. And in the book, you could have colored these, so that could be your activity. Almost to the end, I wanted to end, though, by embedding another activity sheet that relates actually to last week's lesson on Judas Maccabees and the Maccabean Revolt. This is 2 really fun activities, and since I did not put them in last week, I wanted you to see the directions for how you could make and then play a game of dreidel, which is a game that is popular during Hanukkah. A dreidel is a top, it has 4 sides, and in the video I showed you, the children were playing the game of dreidel. Each side has a Hebrew letter that stands for an expression that means a great miracle happened there, or a great miracle happened here, either way. In the game of dreidel, 4 letters also stand for the game instructions. So you can see right here, they're the 4, Nun, Gimel, Hai, and Shin, I guess you pronounce them. So there are directions for how to play dreidel if you'd like to learn it. Second thing, for all of you chefs, another Jewish tradition at Hanukkah is potato pancakes. And it's fried in oil to remember the miracle of the oil that God provided. Remember, they had 1 day of oil, and yet it burned for 8 days. A favorite dish is potato pancakes, and this involves using an onion, potatoes, eggs, some matzah meal. I suppose if you have no matzah meal, there are probably substitutions like flour that would work. They would not be, official potato pancakes, but they might still be delicious. Salt and pepper, oil, and then they are dipped during Hanukkah in applesauce and sour cream. Interesting. But those are two just fun things for you if you would like to do them. All right, I'm going to put up the homework. Don't forget, you can always check RenWeb and make sure you've done all your work. Make sure there's nothing missing. I will do that, and I hope you have a good couple of days, and I'll be back with you on Thursday.